Okay, Pierre, it looks like we're live.
Awesome. Great, thank you. It's great to be here. Would like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this really great session. It's going to be very excited. I know the speakers here on the panel are turbocharged about speaking with all of you. Just wanted to welcome everyone. Genpact is one of the largest global professional services firms that support our customers with global transformation activities, very much focused on innovation and digital and intelligent operations for our clients. I'm Pierre Legrand. I'll introduce myself in a second, but I also wanted to introduce our speakers today. Karen Buck is the Executive Vice President, Commercial, Retail, and Payment Operations for TD Bank. Karen, in that role, is responsible for leading operations supporting the regional, commercial, corporate, and specialty and retail bank. She's a customer-centric leader, which is very important now, who focuses on people, process, and technology to continue to build a better bank. Karen has 28 years of experience in the financial services industry, and during her career, delivers strong results across multiple business segments in the retail and commercial banking and wealth management space. So, Karen, welcome to you. Thank you for joining. We have our friend Andy. Andy, I'll get it wrong, but I've tried before. Efstathiou, Banking Sourcing Research Director for Nelson Hall. And in that role, Andy has global responsibility for retail and commercial banking BPS, capital markets, and RPA, AI, and FinTech. I'm sure you have a few others in the bag you'll let us know about during this one. Andy assists both the buy-side and vendor organizations in assessing opportunities and supplier capabilities across banking services. He covers core banking, payments, mortgage and loans, securities processing. So Andy, thank you for joining us. We'll get a wave from you as well, so thank you so much. Next is my partner in crime, my compadre. His name is Jason Osborne. Jason is the global head of consumer banking for Genpact. He is acutely responsible for driving Genpact's global effort to become a trusted digital transformation services provider and thought leader in consumer banking. Jason has over 20 years of experience in financial services, leading multiple financial services organizations in the US and Europe. He's an advocate of driving strategic change, major growth initiatives, and leading a very large team across multiple geographies. Jason, I welcome you, my friend.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And my name is Pierre Legrand. I'm your moderator. I get to corral all these folks once they start talking. But my background is running Genpact's global transformation services team for financial services. I've been in the banking industry for 25 years, not showing my age, but I've been across financial services, technology, retail industries, and airlines, having recently worked at PwC, but now very happily at Genpact. Really, I work across a number of different clients across 3 different regions, Australia, the US, and Europe, working very much across transformation and digital banking architectures. So a few things about what we'll be discussing today. We're going to talk about how the global health and economic crisis is reshaping the industry and the financial services, how the banks and financial services industries companies are adjusting to that change, and then how can we talk about ideas that look to accelerate digital transformation and digital investments in order to support real change in the industry. Some few housekeeping points. We want to hear from you. So this session will hopefully capture a lot of your comments. So there's a chat window that you can put your comments in. I'll try to intersperse some of those as we go along. You know, a lot of this change is happening on the fly. Whilst we'll talk about a few things, there's so much happening in digital banking and in the financial services industry now. We'd love to get your comments and potentially talk about them as well. So that would be great. A recording of this session will be made post the event. So we'll make that available to you folks. And then should we run out of time and unable to answer your questions, we will definitely follow up with you. So with that, I thought we would kick off. So a little bit on the perspective around the global crisis that we have, health, and in some places economic. This is really reshaping consumer banking, right? So what used to be an industry that had a fair mix of offline and online is being driven predominantly online. And I was telling friends the other day how I'm now walking into places where clearly there are signs that says we don't accept cash anymore. So what has that done? So the expectation that your banking services providers are going to play a more crucial role is bigger than ever before. Um, and they'll have to get closer to having a more human touch in terms of working with customers and us. So, Karen, with that, I just wanted to see the major shifts that you are seeing in the industry during these very difficult times, and how financial services institutions are adjusting to this, and what are some of the key learnings we can get out of it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Pierre. And just to start, you mentioned that one of your roles is to corral us all. So I wish you all the best in that as we go through the next hour or so talking about this. But, it's interesting when we reflect on the last couple of months, right, in terms of how banks are, transitioning in this, we'll say this new norm. And when I reflect back to the start of COVID, as an industry, banks were operating from a position of strength. And in general, we're well positioned to support their customers and help ease the burden of financial distress, right, that many were experiencing as a result. And it's interesting because when I think back about how banks have responded, and quite frankly continue to respond, things like PPP and the CARES Act, Main Street lending, everybody is operating at light speed and implementing changes to their operating model very quickly. Across the TD organization, when we created our program called TD Cares, which is a comprehensive program that provides financial relief options for U.S. customers, we focus on a few things. What were the financial assistance benefits that multiple customer segments required? What were the products and services that they were going to require going forward? We thought about customers who were impacted by COVID-19, and we proactively reached out to help and direct and ensure that they were eligible to receive financial assistance that was required. And based on their unique needs, we operated in different manners. The other piece that I would say as we responded, and not only TD, but quite frankly, the whole industry, we adapted very quickly to meet the customer's needs of where they were, right? Where they were in their local and largely remote environment. You talked about the branch network, right? Pre-COVID, there was a large reliance on branches, through much of banking. And with COVID, banks had to serve their customers in a digital-only environment. So when I think about some of those changes, and quite frankly, some of those changes that will be lasting because we're measured now differently, is like, how do we think digital first? How do we incorporate the need of meeting customers' needs of where they are, but then to your point, driving that human interaction, because customers still want to understand that there is a human that they can work with if wanted. So that focus on omni capabilities are going to continue to grow. But at the end of the day, it's how do we continue to transform, drive scale, drive efficiencies, and meet customers where they want to be.
Thank you. That's great, Karen, and some really great perspectives for us, listening to you about how your bank has actually gone through an acceleration to provide these services to their customers at speeds we never even imagined in banking. So, Andy, it's an interesting point. In order to provision those services rapidly and quickly, that hits all areas of the supply chain. So I'm really interested in, given your industry analyst role and your broad perspective, what are both technology providers and banks doing around this? And what are the key changes you've observed, and how service providers are pivoting to support the banks in this rapid service provision?
Sure. So what we're seeing is when COVID-19 hit, in the United States in March, for the next 2 months, there was sort of a pause in many of what the vendors and the banks were doing on an ongoing basis. But the pause took place in order to move everything to a work-from-home environment, and that required provisioning, and also to strengthen the business continuity disaster recovery protocols. But after that, what we have been seeing is an acceleration of previous trends. And those trends are towards cloud migration and digital transformation. And in fact, it isn't just a return to the prior trends, it's an acceleration of those trends, and it's pulled in those trends, the adoption rate, by about 2 to 3 years. So there's been a very aggressive acceleration of adoption. And the key adoption trends that we're seeing include, first, cloud migration, but what's happening is that's moving from a single cloud strategy to a hybrid multi-cloud strategy, and the vendors are helping the banks work through what their core cloud is, what their ancillary cloud is, what they want to play with in that, how the platforms can be modularized, and how new functionality can be deployed using DevOps methodologies to accelerate the adoption of new functionalities, and working with ecosystems of software vendors. The second trend is towards omni-channel migration. The banks were closing branches. In 2008, that was the high point in the United States of number of branches. Number of branches have been reduced by 25% since 2008. And since COVID hit, the banks have been working on plans to accelerate bank closures and move clients to the omni-channel environment. Now, as you move customers to the omni-channel environment, there has been resistance in the past, but with COVID, there's been less resistance, and even when there's been difficulty, there's been a need for support to help, shall we say, legacy or long-standing customers adapt to that new channel and new access. So there's been a lot of work about that, and a lot of work about improving support for customer experience in terms of dealing with the online environment. The third trend has been adoption of cybersecurity. The move to the cloud, the move to work from home, the move to remote environment has necessitated increased security measures. We see, media headlines of hacks, and that's mostly been of existing accounts at banks. But, we can anticipate with operations being delivered remotely and work from home that in the future there would be hacks in that area. And so implementation of cybersecurity to control that environment, support for helping de-risk or reduce the risk of the entire supply chain for the banks has been an area. Now, the key benefits that are being sought are improved customer experience and user experience or employee experience. Prior to COVID, the focus was on customer experience, improving that. In immediate response to COVID, it's been in improving employee experience, supporting the work from home environment, and we're seeing the beginning of a post-COVID environment where they're looking to coordinate customer experience and employee experience in order to improve interactions between customers and employees. Second benefit is improved insights via better data management and analysis. So data has been an area that, in data management, And that is manifesting itself with increased levels of intelligent automation, the combination of robotic process automation plus artificial intelligence, and improved data intake, especially in the unstructured data area. And that has been primarily to accelerate customer onboarding. And then finally, the third key benefit that's sought is improved agility, the ability to match revenues and costs, to ramp up operations, to match transaction levels, using often robotic process automation to make volume ramp-ups and ramp-downs easier to execute. So those are the type of changes in the areas where we're seeing the vendors adapt their offerings in order to support the changed environment.
Andy, that's great. And the thing I take away from that is the cloud is here and in force. In fact, more than ever before. Multi-channel, omni-channel has to be there in the digital environment. And that customer experience and the data gleaned from that is going to be as critical as well. Now moving over to Jason. Jason, with all of that, what are we hearing from Genpact's clients? Concerns, opportunities, accelerators? Where's the future going?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pierre. And first of all, let me thank CBA Live. I think this is a terrific event. And obviously my esteemed colleagues here, Karen and Andy. Certainly a pleasure to be on here with you today. And Pierre, to Karen's point, you've got a tough job. So hopefully it won't be as tough as some of the moderator and speaker last night in the U.S. presidential debate, but we'll see if we can get there. And Pierre, certainly one of the most forward-thinking folks that I've worked with as it relates to banking. So certainly appreciate your thoughts and input here as well. But in terms of what our clients are looking for and asking for is no surprise, a lot of the things that Aaron, Andy, and Karen were talking about, specific to cloud, specific to data, specific to client experience. And I think one of the challenges that banks are having is, how do you prioritize? Where do you prioritize? Where's the biggest bang for the buck? So some of the conversations that we've been having is, as banks look to, they've historically spent a lot of money on digitizing the onboarding experience or the account opening experience. Now looking at digitizing omni-channel, customer service, collections, from front to back. Where is the biggest bang for the buck? How do you help clients in terms of being able to think through that? It's not going to be the same for every bank. It depends on what the bank's priorities are, what the strategy is, where their assets sit within the balance sheet, what's the focus area. But as you start to double click on each of those and really being able to think through and have maniacal focus on what matters most, that's certainly something that we're hearing from our clients. The other thing I would say is, in terms of that prioritization is, how do you take a step back? And now that banks have certainly accelerated digital since COVID, what was, to Andy's point, going to take 2 or 3 years from an adoption from a customer perspective is now here today. And you think the same in restaurant industry. Pre-COVID, I may have used Uber Eats or some of the other restaurant delivery services a few times. Now we use it almost every week, right? The same thing is going to happen in banking. Pre-COVID, 70 to 75% of checking accounts were opened at the branch. Post-COVID, that number is not going to be the same. So the question is, how do you continue to drive that digital adoption, but how do you be there for the customers? How do you look at it front to back? Because surprisingly, a lot of the customers we've spoken with, despite all of the digitization efforts and things happening since COVID, the net promoter scores have gone up marginally for the most part, but they haven't gone up as much as you would expect, or what would have probably happened without COVID in terms of digital client experience. And so I think that the other piece is, it ties to data, it ties to analytics, it ties to the solutions, but how do you drive that end-to-end client experience that I think people rapidly tried to address during COVID, but now that there's a chance potentially to take a step back and look end to end, how do you address that and how do you prioritize it going forward?
Yeah, Jason, some great points there. Very insightful about what's happening in the market. shifting now because I'm keeping everyone on time and we're catching up, which is great. We got a little bit of a late start. What you don't want me to do is catch up so much that I can start throwing oddball questions at you. So, watch the pace a little bit. There's a view that digitization abstracts empathy, which is that the more you digitize, the less human interaction there is, right? And I think we're all tackling with this piece, which is how do we engage with our financial services institutions digitally, quick, rapidly, in this environment, but also feel like we're important, right? Um, I'm still myself still dialing into certain call centers or whatever, and still hearing that it's COVID. You may have to wait, but that's like now how long? Many, many months. Is that still an issue? Shouldn't it have been sorted by now? So we're trying to get a feel about where customers are at, and servicing, and how does this move to self-service also allow us to feel important in some way? So, Karen, in that acceleration that you talked about, how did you strike that balance? And in your channels, right, across your channels?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Pierre. And, as I reflect on some of the things that Jason and Andy were saying, a couple of things stood out as I think about it in context of this question. And, one of it is about acceleration, right, of the digitization of the journey that was on. The other piece was customer expectations. And, Jason gave the Uber example, or Uber Eats. And I think when we think about it from a banking perspective, we're no longer being judged against bankers, right? Now we are being judged against every digital experience that every one of us is going through as we're sitting in our homes or as we're sitting, elsewhere trying to manage in this new environment. And you're absolutely right. We've been at this 6 months now, so we might as well consider this the new norm. When I think about it in terms of how we're operating and some of the things that we're thinking through, I would say, first of all, COVID forced us to rethink how and where we serve our customers, right? We talked about that, and we talked about the move to a largely digital channel. But I will say that we have completely upended and changed our operating models in many regards. We recognized, number one, that we needed to decision items more quickly. We could no longer afford to take 6 months to analyze, 8 months to plan, and then 12 months to execute. So we had upended our entire decision-making process to enable us to be nimble and react very quickly to the dynamic environment. Now, that human side of banking, and we do use human as one of our taglines, clearly is still important to us, from a business perspective. So then we say, how do we operationalize our digital channels in real time to effectively respond to the changing environment? And I reflect on a couple of things. Is that number one, customers can't reach our large branch network. No, we're going to have pressure in the contact centers. We're going to have pressure on our digital tools. How do we use our 28,000 colleagues across the footprint to support our additional channels? When I think about our digital first approach for new product requirements, such as PPP or others, how do we leverage things like RPA or other simple automation tools to ensure that we're automating versus leveraging people to get things done? And then, to finalize, a couple of final points is we look to keep a human-centric approach to banking. We launched new capabilities, including an arsenal of chatbots, text messages, and personalized customer service feeds. Because to your point, Pierre, I want to feel important. So when I call, I want to know that that person knows it's me. Or when I'm logging on, I want to know that the bank knows that's me behind there. So we really are looking at the suite of tools that are out there and saying, okay, if we're going to think digital first, we need to think differently. We need to think digital first, but we've got an awful lot of data, and let's ensure we leverage it to ensure that we can personalize where it's critically important.
Great, Karen. Thank you. That's awesome. Really goes to show what the banks are doing to try and marry up the two in an online space. And I guess, Jason, always coming back to you for that client perspective and the what's happening in the broader market. What is the next wave? So we talked about the rapid digitization, scaling that up, being empathetic. What's going to be the next thing we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a great question, Pierre, and I think a lot of what we're talking about related to client experience can't happen without data and analytics. So in terms of whenever we're talking, what is next in banking, look, the challenge that banks have today, and all banks, by the way, not just being compared to the Amazons and Facebooks and Googles and all of the great client experience technology driven companies that are out there. But I think the real challenge for banks today is how do you not become commoditized, right? At the end of the day, a bank: borrow, save, pay, invest, protect. 5 things. How do you create experiences off the back of that data so that it's not just about the phone call or the engagement with the customer service rep, or it's not just about going to the branch? You think about how much branches and the banking experience has changed. I remember as a kid going to bank branch with my grandmother, and the bank manager knowing her name and saying hello and having a conversation. That rarely exists anymore, right? So the question is now, how do you still, going back to Karen's point, how do you humanize? How do you drive empathy? And how do you do this in a way that you're still leading with technology? And I think that is the next, one of the next big transformations in banking tied to that client experience is probably going to be within partnerships, the partnership ecosystems. And again, how do you drive data through partnership ecosystems? Obviously, you have to minimize and aggregate the data and PII and everything else associated with that. But how do you create unique client experiences? So, for example, why do I still have to pull out my credit card when I go pay at the pump, right? Why can't I just pull up and somehow the device should know me, my vehicle, whether it's AI, whether it's RFID, whatever it might be, where I can make a payment? How cool would it be if I went to a restaurant, or next time I ordered Uber Eats and on my credit card it said, hey, this one's on us, thanks for your loyalty, right? Those are the kinds of services and experiences and things that I think will truly differentiate from a banking experience, certainly from a client's experience perspective. And I think that's going to be the next wave. How we get there is going to be through the continuous digitization, continuous cloud transformation, continuous data and analytics capabilities, and then being really creative to be able to compete with these technology companies that banks are competing with, frankly, to be able to create those experiences. So personally, I think client experience off the back of data and analytics and doing it the right way that builds trust, builds rapport, but also creates those unique, delightful moments, if you will, or things that financial services companies can provide. And that's the way it's headed. It's just a matter of how long will it take to get there and who's going to get there first.
Thanks, Jason. Great insights as well there. The focus on data comes out pretty strong. I've been hearing it a few times now in some of these answers. So we're gonna come back to that absolutely. Andy, there's a number of things happening more broadly in the industry in terms of what's driving this acceleration and cloud adoption, as you talked about in your previous answer. What's different now incrementally on top of the obviously the pandemic and all of those things in terms of adoption rate? What are the things that are standing out from you that's making the adoption so precipitous as a result of some of these macro factors?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head that it's precipitous. And so what we've done here at Nelson Hall is we've fielded a number of surveys to try to get a clear understanding across a broad range of enterprises, broad range of banks, as to what the plans are, what they anticipate doing. One of the surveys, we surveyed 1,000 major enterprises to assess the impact of the current economy on operations. And what our results show for the banking sector is that retail banks are anticipating or forecasting a 31% decline in revenues, accompanied by an 8% increase in costs, and that would lead to a 42% decrease in profits. that puts an aggressive margin squeeze on the business. And COVID-19, as a result, has been speeding up long-term business trends and drivers, as I discussed earlier, and as all of the survey data shows to us. What is favored within external IT spending? Cloud software, software as a service, digital transformation projects are favored. So they intend to continue spending and accelerate spending in that. The largest cuts to external IT spending will be in IT infrastructure, consulting, application development and maintenance, and major system rollouts. So there's a restructuring of the spend within the IT budget. The external operational transformation will be least impacted in card account opening and onboarding and finance and accounting area, and in payment processing. So those are the areas where they expect closer to the same pace of spending. Obviously, or perhaps not obvious, but in lending and mortgages, they anticipate restructuring where they're spending their money, where they're expecting to ramp up, as well as ramp down. They expect fewer originations, larger expenditures in default management. So they're reallocating where they're spending their dollars, reallocating what subcomponents they're focusing on. And the retail banks do not, surprising to me, they don't plan to increase outsourced delivery. But 81% expect to increase in-house delivery by 8% on average. And actually, while that may seem counterintuitive with the difficulty in the market, it's actually what we saw during the great financial crisis. There was a period of time when outsourced delivery was actually decreased. So the large continued increase from work from home environment indicates and implies, and the verbal feedback we've had indicates a large increase or large anticipated increase in the use of cloud environments. So that's how we're seeing, and what our conversations indicate is how the spend allocation will change, where the focus of operations will shift to, how they plan to reallocate the work.
Great, Andy. Those data points are absolutely critical to understanding what are the factors that are going to drive some of the decision making in the banks. This speed and breakneck pace we're operating at, and I don't know if anyone's felt it, but notwithstanding just from the zooming on Zoom meetings, and how much we're pivoting back and forth and making changes and taking decisions like never before. All I think about is this word speed, 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 speed. Now, in all of the banks, there were a number of initiatives that were there. Some were a little bit further down the train in terms of time to implement, whether they had budget or not, what was going to happen. So, Karen, I'd be very interested as you look at the change portfolio in your bank. How much acceleration are you seeing? And then what's the prioritization? Because you could do all of these, but not all at once. Everyone's working from home. There's competing priorities. How's everyone dealing with this? I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I reflect on some of the things that Andy was talking about in terms of how organizations are reallocating their spend based on, forecasts for revenues and expenses, et cetera. And, I think about it from a couple of perspectives is, first and foremost, as an organization, you really need to be maniacal, right, about the customers that you're trying to attack and that market segment that you're servicing. And if you keep that in mind and say, okay, given our portfolio spend, how do we accelerate this digitization? Because particularly in operations, what became very clear is in an environment where we're not fully digitized, it is really problematic to manage in the environment we're in, right? Like if you would have asked me a year ago, could we operate in a largely work from home environment from an operational perspective, I would have said no. Now we're making it work, right? And we've got a lot of good plans in place as we look forward to take advantage of some of that. And the way we're trying to prioritize things is really in a couple of buckets. Is, first getting back to the customer centricity piece, ensuring that we're keeping the customer segments front and center and thinking about their journeys, right? Now, how do we remove the friction out of their end to end and provide them with a better experience? What is needed to meet the customer where they want to be met and how they want to interact with us? How do we take out, some of the, I'll say the obstacles that we tend to throw to customers? And that's where that end-to-end perspective is critically important. It's not enough to just focus on the front end, have a great UI that, customers love and say it's fantastic, then have a bunch of, manual processes in the back end trying to make it work, right? You've got to digitize the end-to-end. And if there is a way to simplify that end-to-end process, it's critical to focus efforts there. Then I think about the ramifications from a CX perspective and also from a business perspective is, are there technology needs, process changes, et cetera, that you need to build in? Stepping back and taking a holistic view, focus on developing a roadmap and identifying what requires that large-scale technology changes versus low-code and no-code to drive efficiency, right? Because if we're not going to have the big budgets to be able to do these transformational projects, we need to find other ways to drive efficiency and really understanding the interconnectivity so that strategic decisions can be made. And then once the changes are made, quite frankly, continuing to reinvest because this world is going to continue to evolve. So how do you ensure that you've got the efficiency gains translated to other areas? And then last piece I would touch on is stakeholder partnership, is getting all of the players at the table. Now, very often in banks, we tend to operate in our silos, right? Is ensuring that we've got all the stakeholders that represent that end to end, and that there's everybody's informed about the feasibility of changes and any potential roadblocks. At the end of the day, it's about moving thoughtfully, but with the speed and identifying really what is needed to be done to do that, and we can no longer do it in a vacuum or in our own silos.
Thank you, Karen. That's a interesting perspective there. Jason, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball because you knew I would do that on purpose. I'm very interested in where payments is going. So in this whole speed thing, we've seen the banks pivoting towards this kind of, back to what I said is there's no more cashless. Then we've got the likes of PayPal's of the world, and then we're seeing these Afterpays and Klarnas. All of this is happening at such speed. I'd be interested to get your views. I mean, we're from a Genpact perspective, I know payments is a big area, but I'd be interested to get your perspective on, at this speed, where are we going with payments?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, Pierre, and I appreciate the curveball. And I'm going to reverse, by the way, and ask you the same question because I know that you're at the forefront of this, my friend. So in terms of payments, I'll tell you, it's unbelievable. I think real-time payments, especially in the U.S., as we start to think about open banking and probably figuring out how to leverage some of the technologies a little bit better that we haven't done yet is certainly going to be key. I also think seamless payments is going to be pervasive, right? You think of everyone a couple of years ago used to talk about the Amazon single swipe purchase experience. I think from a payments perspective, that's where everything is going to be headed. And then, by the way, when you single swipe on whatever it is that you purchased, you could have the option on debit card, credit card, or to your point, Afterpay, Klarna's, et cetera. Could you break this up over 10 payments, $10 each, or whatever it might be? And so I think from a payments perspective, it's certainly going to affect lending in different ways. If you look at Australia today as an example, in the not too distant future, actually Afterpay solutions are going to overtake credit card payments, believe it or not. I think that that's a trend that will likely happen in Europe and eventually in the US as well. And the question for banks is, how do we react? What do we do? So payments is so multifaceted, everything from, again, real-time payments to payment transaction types and the way that we pay, all the way through to lending and the way that we borrow off the back of payments capabilities is going to change. And I think it's going to be a pretty fascinating place to be in over the next few years. But Pierre, just in terms of your thoughts, what are your thoughts on the future of payments and where the world's headed?
Well, a few things. I believe that the reason why I'm holding back a little bit is because I'm trying to think of, when we pay, there's a number of different things that we would like to do that are becoming should be becoming very easier to do. So one of those is the terms of those payments. So you've been talking about the Afterpays and the Klarnas, and there's standard credit card terms, but how those payments get applied into things like loyalty as well. So imagine a world where on the fly I could determine how to apply my loyalty per payment, right? So could I choose a different loyalty scheme for each payment that gets processed at the point of payment? So for me, the future from a consumption perspective is more about modularity of payment. And then obviously there's an implication of that about how that gets processed in the back end. But the more that you as a financial services provider can understand about me, and we talked about data before, and my patterns of buying, imagine if we could actually preempt that, which is to say, hey, Pierre, we know that you're going to be traveling soon. Maybe you want to apply some of this to a loyalty position that allows you to get credits for your next trip on something, right? So, those are the type of things I think where the industry is going, is to get a lot more contextual, all the way from the journey to payment, the point of payment, and then post-payment as well. So that is where the industry is going in terms of being able to understand and get data, as we talked about before. How quick that's going to happen, we'll see. And that's why I was saying, when I started this, it's an interesting thing to see about when it's going to happen. But yeah. I think that type of micro application of payment capabilities, Jason, is where it's going to be.
Yeah, 100%. And I think to that point, Pierre, the question for banks is going to be, what is the bank's role in this, right? Because at the end of the day, the payment, depending upon where it comes from, that asset sits with the bank. So how the bank plays a role in this and how they partner with some of these, technologies and new payments capabilities, or, and how they also provide things like real-time payments, I think is going to be absolutely critical. And how do you have a little bit of that co-opetition with some of these players as we move forward is going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds.
Absolutely. So I haven't seen a lot of questions come through unless I'm missing something from the flight deck here. I'm looking at it very closely for Q&A. So if there were any questions that anyone has, that would be great. If not, you get to enjoy watching me surprise these folks with a couple of off-the-cuff questions. Presume everyone would love that as well. So Andy, while we're waiting for them to come through, you've heard a little bit about those two elements of the speed thing, the future of payments. Give us some final thoughts about where this is all going. Play it out for me. Walk me through from your broad industry perspective. Where are we going to next?
So what's really happening in terms of where are we going next and how, and sort of the free-form version of how this is developing, is they're building up ecosystems. Right now we have separate entities that really don't communicate very much. So for example, in payments between the merchant acceptance corporation, the card corporation, the bank, etc. And those are beginning to work together with and create partnerships, very rudimentary at this point, that would provide additional functionality, additional opportunities, because if you're using data to provide context and support for a person making a payment, since there are multiple links in the chain, you really have to have those multiple links in the chain coordinate in order to develop and curate the relevant data that produces that type of an outcome. So these type of ecosystems and working together, what generally comes under the rubric of open banking, are beginning to develop, and I think that's going to be an area that doesn't have a clear roadmap. Will have to be worked out both at the technological level and at the industry level, what the roadmap for coordinating and working together will be, as well as what type of functionality and capabilities can be delivered with that.
Great, Andy, that's fantastic. Karen, I've got a more kind of, esoterical discussion point with you is, I went to an ATM the other day, and when I was using kind of my phone in the phone case to tap my PIN on the ATM, are we gonna be accessing these systems? I mean, I often think of identity and access in the future of how we're gonna access banking services. Do you see a change there as well? Will I ever touch cash? And lastly, I just realized today, I don't think I've touched a coin in months.
No, it is interesting, right? And if you step back and think about all of the payment types, first of all, we still have lots of payment types. And I think one of the things we started talking about early on in this conversation was the acceleration, right? So does this new digital environment start to accelerate the exit of things like cash and the exit of things like checks, which are still very prominent in the U.S.? And I think about it from a couple of ways. And, first of all, from a U.S. perspective, the move to digital is real and it will continue to grow. I think as an industry, we have to get our head around the cash and the check side of the business, right? Because right now there's still a large number of consumers who are unbanked. So that cash tool is critically important, right, for the unbanked. And it's interesting because to your point earlier where you're seeing stores where they're saying we only take, whatever, credit, no cash accepted. That's problematic, right, in many parts of the U.S. So this drive to digital, if I think about the opportunities from a bank perspective, this drive to digital is real. It has a lot of benefits, but somehow we've got to figure out the ramifications of that move and moving too quickly. So, and to your point, will we do things differently? Will there get to a point where you don't have to touch cash? Probably. Will it be in our respective lifetimes? Maybe not, but I think we'll continue to see lots of good progress along the way.
And Jason, with a few minutes left, how has Genpact itself reacted to the crisis and turned it into opportunities for our customers as well? I mean, we've also had to pivot at the same time as our customers in supporting their operations. So what insights can you give us about how Genpact pivoted as well and moved at pace during this process?
Yeah, great question. So I've been here about 6 months. So let me put that out there. And I can tell you, we are not unlike any other company that is going through this digital challenge. And part of the reason I joined was to be an accelerator or a catalyst for that specific digitization challenge that everyone is going through. So in terms of the opportunity, both the challenge and opportunity from a Genpact perspective is, number one, we are disrupting ourselves. Without a doubt, we want to disrupt ourselves. We need to disrupt ourselves, and we are headed down that path of pure digitization of everything that we do. And the way that we've done that is we have our core capabilities. And those core capabilities are AI, machine learning, et cetera, data analytics, digital platform that we use to drive initially, number one, data and analytics capabilities. So for example, think of collections as an example. So if you have a 24-year-old in San Francisco who spends all of their time on TikTok and has never been to a branch, opened their account online, and only interacts with the mobile app, why on earth are you trying to call them? If you don't have the data and the capabilities behind that, then you may not be able to make that decision and think about how do you spend the bank's money wisely. When you think about account opening, how do you leverage data to target the right customers? Karen earlier was talking about segmentation. How do you leverage data to drive that segmentation? When you think about omni-channel customer service, how do you create channel propensity models so that you already know how a customer wants to interact with you before they've even done it? And then you can leverage digital, mobile, if it's voice, whatever it might be, but being where the customer wants to be met, when they want to be met, and how they want to be met. I think it's going to be absolutely critical. And that's the path that we're headed down with our core capabilities. And we've only accelerated, like many others, accelerated those digital capabilities since the financial or the pandemic started.
That's great, Jason. Thank you. Look, in summary, it's pretty simple. Banking has changed. We are standing at a point in time where if you're in this industry, you're looking at it and you'll say, I remember when this whole thing started. And look back at that moment that banking pretty much changed forever. What we're hearing from the panelists is that data will become absolutely critical to understand customers better and to be able to harness that data, to be able to service customers. The operations that are going to be required are going to have to scale pretty vastly. And to scale at that pace and at that speed, cloud is going to play a major role in all of that. So what's that cocktail do? It all boils up to a different customer proposition and how customers are going to be interacting with financial services over time. And also who are going to be providing those financial services. Can the banks do it all? And so you'll see things like open banking, as Andy talked about, where different providers will be coming in to offer financial services to create that greater ecosystem of customer service. So, Genpact is going to spend a lot of time working with all their customers around looking at all of that. We're pretty excited about the future. And really, we wanted to thank everyone for joining this session and hearing from our panelists. I'd like to thank them. They were well behaved, finished on time. We didn't fight with each other. And put my job as a moderator, you made it very easy. So thank you so much. I didn't see any new questions. So I would, if there's any questions anyone has for any of us, please reach out via the channels and we'll get back to you with the best amount of information we can. So thank you.
Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.